My name is Marc Gillespie. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Cbus Property. And thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I'm here to share some insights about embodied carbon risks and opportunities specifically in the property sector. So the topic of embodied carbon is rapidly becoming a key area of priority for the property industry. And it's gained a lot of traction and momentum over the last couple of years. We do define it sort of there as the carbon that's embedded in the buildings from the construction process and materials that we use in building that asset. And the main sources of carbon for a building typically come from the structure, so steel, concrete, and facade. And that makes up about 80% of the overall carbon impact for sort of typical commercial buildings. And the main drivers of why we're seeing that this is an emerging carbon risk and something of a priority is that, as you can see, sort of globally, 28% of total greenhouse emissions, let's say, comes from the building sector. In 2019, most of that is coming from the operational carbon side. But we do know that a lot of property companies have net zero carbon targets, many by 2030 they've set them, but also as the electricity grid starts to decarbonise as well, the impact from embodied carbon compared to operational carbon flips and actually inverses. So the majority of the carbon impact in the future is going to be in embodied carbon. So for us, it's turning our attention to that next phase. And as Ros did earlier point out that Cbus Property, we did have a 2030 net zero operational carbon target. We were able to bring that forward by 8 years and actually achieve that for our office portfolio earlier this year. And that sort of demonstrates that we can do that now as a property sector. We've got the technology to do so, and we can get there in relatively cost-effective means. And so now our attention is turning to this embodied carbon challenge. Next slide, thank you. And as mentioned, like a couple of these presentations talk about, there's a lot of industry momentum and various initiatives that everyone seems to be pulling together and heading in the same direction. So first is MECLA, and I'm very proud to be part of the work that MECLA does, particularly the last couple of years. I've said this before to many people, but I don't think I've ever been part of such a collective of organisations that all come together that are willing to share and work together on trying to address this challenge. And so it's quite inspirational, and I'm very proud to be part of. So thanks to Monica and Hudson for all the leadership that they've shown. And MECLA has brought together builders, they've brought together manufacturers, suppliers, designers, architects, engineers, even quantity surveyors, all these people that need to get around a table to solve this challenge because we can't do it by ourselves. And there are a lot of challenges. There is a lack of, as we heard, sort of consistent, clear and consistent demand for this. There's a lack of standards for measuring and benchmarking embodied carbon. There's a lack of tools and education. And there's also a technological challenge as well. So it's not easy. There's some really hard to abate sectors like carbon, steel. So we do need to work together and send a clear signal to those sorts of manufacturers that this is something that we want, and we're willing to work with you on that. And so you should be investing in new technology. So two other organisations that it sounded like we didn't plan this, but Dana really sort of opened this up for my conversation as well, is the Green Building Council of Australia and Neighbours. So they have been working together and partnering together to create a national tool to measure embodied carbon, which is a really crucial step for the property sector. And I kind of liken it to the way that Neighbours originally first created an energy rating tool for buildings. And I think it's kind of like a fairly simple thing to do, but what that did was it enabled us to be able to measure, benchmark, compare, but also set targets and mandates, particularly in industry, because we had a lot of faith in that measurement tool. So I think that the Neighbours embodied carbon calculator, as that is adopted, is going to unlock this sort of market transformation that we need across the industry and enable those sorts of mandates and policies to be set. Dana also talked a little bit about the New South Wales government flagging that they're going to start to set measurement and disclosure targets in the property sector. I think they're going to start applying that to commercial buildings, but we do expect that to start flow down to all different property and asset types. And then another one just recently in terms of talking about property news, property manager GPT, they just certified the first industrial building to be a net zero embodied carbon industrial building through the climate active building standard. So there is a lot of momentum, I guess, is what I'm saying, and there's a lot of different initiatives and groups that we're trying to all head in the same direction. Next slide, thanks. So a little bit about Cbus Property's sustainability strategy and how we're thinking about and addressing embodied carbon. Cbus Property is a wholly owned subsidiary of Cbus, the super fund, and we're their direct property developer and investor arm of the fund. We have a portfolio of $6 billion worth of office, retail, residential projects, and a further $5 billion worth of development in hand. And we mainly target the commercial office and residential sector as well. And so like I mentioned before, that we did achieve a net zero carbon for our operational carbon for our office portfolio earlier this year. And we did that through a really highly energy efficient portfolio of office buildings, as much on-site solar as possible, backed by renewable electricity purchasing arrangements that we've got in hand. And then we did have to offset just a minor amount at the end to achieve that. So it is possible, and it is cost effective to do so if you think about it in a strategic way. Next slide, thanks. And so how we're thinking about embodied carbon, or our embodied carbon strategy at the moment, is first principle is that any new project that we're doing, we are measuring the embodied carbon of those projects, and that relates to our office buildings. It also relates to our residential buildings as well. So that's something relatively easy to implement, and we're working a lot with our designers, architects, quantity surveyors to make sure that we're measuring this carbon up front really early on in the process, and almost using that to set almost like a carbon budget so that we can sort of track that over time and see how we're progressing and implementing different initiatives to see how that's driving down embodied carbon impacts. We also have backed that up with a reduction target of 20%. So along the same lines, we're trying to achieve at least a 20% reduction in embodied carbon for all those new development projects as well. And from 2025 onwards, we've got a target that is quite aspirational, but we want to make sure that any building that we design and develop from that point onwards is going to be a net zero embodied carbon building. So we feel like that is going to be a challenge, and we know that that is, which is why we're sort of part of groups like MECLA and GBCA and neighbours to try to work towards how do we achieve that. But we do want to sort of use that to set a leadership example and sort of show that it is possible and it can be done in a cost-effective manner. And so there's just some recent examples of some projects that we've either delivered or looking to design and deliver. So 83 Peary Street was quite a unique example in Adelaide. We finished that in July. We originally did, I think, the embodied carbon target we were just measuring, but as we were going through the process, we were actually able to push it quite towards the end of the design and actual construction of that building, and swap some things in and out to be able to achieve a 20% reduction in embodied carbon. So that's without even looking at it from early on in the stages. We've also got some new projects, so a residential project, so that's built in. There's a mandatory target that's going out to tender at the moment, and so we're seeking responses from our builders about how we're going to achieve that target. And 435 Burke Street, we're targeting a minimum of 30% reduction. That one's been a really interesting project and process to go through. So we did very early on set a carbon budget and a target, and we've been working with our engineers, designers, architects, and structural engineers and quantity surveyors to push that higher. It's now out to tender, and we're seeking responses back. And we think that there's some builders that we can work with who will be able to push that even higher to almost 40%. So I guess to summarise, like we do see there's a lot of momentum gaining in this space. We see a lot of pressure from our investors. We see a lot of pressure from regulation coming down the line. So we're trying to stay up ahead of that. So we are caught out, and so we can sort of build our internal capability over time. And so I think sort of this room here and the ways to get involved is to start asking questions about your fund managers, your asset managers, about are they measuring embodied carbon just as a start? Are they disclosing those embodied carbon impacts to you? So then you can start having those conversations. Now I will leave it there. Thank you very much.